been missing.
Tom Cameron Swayze.
Ed Huntley. David Duncan. John Chen.
Tom Brokaw.
Is this the dreaded tipping point in Iraq? Tonight, more bombs and guns and violent chaos in Baghdad, and some say this is civil war. A loud boom, then smoke and fire in one of the world's wealthiest neighborhoods. Was this an accident or one man's strange way of going out with a bang? It is a textbook case of mixed messages, an ally in the U.S. war on terror teaching its children to hate Christians and Jews. And with more older drivers on America's roads these days, what's being done to help them keep driving safely?
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. At this point in the conflict in Iraq, coming off a weekend that set new benchmarks for violence, some people who are familiar with the fighting are now calling it a civil war in Iraq. In just the past 2 days, over 100 people have been killed in Baghdad alone. Most of the deaths have been Shiite versus Sunni, Iraqi on Iraqi, and it's now very clear, as we will hear in a moment from General Barry McCaffrey, who's just returned from the region, Baghdad has become the center, the headquarters of the fight of a kind we have not yet seen in this war. We will begin our reporting here tonight with NBC's Mike Betcher in Baghdad. Mike, good evening.
Well, Brian, even by Iraqi standards, the last 3 days in Baghdad have been incredibly violent. Iraq's president said, quote, "We are standing on a dangerous edge. To fall off," he implied, would lead to civil war.
General Barry McCaffrey, a decorated combat veteran and retired four-star general. He's a well-known NBC News analyst who is just back from extensive travels to both Afghanistan and Iraq. General, is there any way for an audience watching at home in America you can tell us just exactly how violent Baghdad is right now?
Well, I think it's the central struggle of the insurgency, the Sunni attempt to regain control of Iraq, and at the same time, in many ways, the Sadr City Shia rebellion is also going on, plus there's huge levels of criminality. It's a very dangerous place, primarily for the poor Iraqi civilians who are caught up in this, as well as the Iraqi police and security forces, and to a lesser extent, by far, to our brave young soldiers and Marines.
Fair to say an American, unguarded, a Westerner walking, driving the streets wouldn't last very long?
You're a dead man. I think if you're a Bradley platoon leader in the 4th Infantry Division, you're in reasonably good shape, because it's a lethal encounter if you attack a U.S. Army or Marine unit. But if you're a diplomat, a contractor, a journalist, and you're out there driving around unprotected, I do not believe you'd last the day.
General, if this isn't civil war that we're watching, how will we know when it starts?
Well, I think it is.
Bring stuff. General McCaffrey, thank you, as always, for being with us tonight.
Good to be with you, Brian.
One of the world's most wanted terrorist leaders is dead tonight, and while you may not know his name, you have likely heard of his deeds, attacks that made world history in their time, including the assault on school children at Beslan in Russia. He was the leader of the Chechen rebels. He was as violent as they come. Tonight, NBC's Fred Francis reports on the sudden death of a wanted man.
In a remote village in a remote part of Russia, the aftermath of an explosion today. A truck packed with 220 pounds of dynamite blew up. Inside, Shamal Basayev, whose lust for bloodshed made him Russia's most wanted man. He was to Russia what bin Laden is to America, with a similar creed. Kill anyone from children to chief executives for a fanatical cause.
He is to blame for thousands of innocent lives. He eagerly and willingly...
And turning now to this country, in Mississippi today, the opening moves in a landmark lawsuit that pits victims of Hurricane Katrina against their insurance companies. As you may know, this is a hot issue in the storm zone. The question at the heart of this is whether water damage from Katrina is classified as hurricane damage or flood damage. The stakes here are huge. $75 billion in flood and storm surge damage was reported in 1.7 million claims. The story tonight from NBC's Mark Potter.
In taking his case to court, police Gulfport, Mississippi.
Quickly to gas prices. The government said today that the average price of a gallon of gas has hit its second highest level ever, $2.97 a gallon. That's for regular unleaded. That is up 65 cents a gallon from just a year ago. Henry Paulson was sworn in today as the Bush administration's new Treasury Secretary. He's the former head of the prestigious New York investment bank Goldman Sachs, where he was, by the way, well compensated. His new government salary of just over $175,000 a year represents about 2 days' work at Goldman Sachs. Paulson takes over for John Snow. On Wall Street today, a mixed finish. The Dow was up just under 13 points. NASDAQ was down 13. We'll take a break here when Nightly News for this Monday night continues. NBC News in depth. Tonight, a problem for the United States. After 9/11, Saudi Arabia promised the U.S. it would reform and teach tolerance. So why do its official school textbooks still call Christians and Jews the enemy? And later tonight, a bad accident this past weekend. An elderly driver smashes into a crowd at a festival, raising the question once again, how old is too old to be behind the wheel? We're back with NBC News in depth tonight. We're calling it teaching intolerance. Ever since 15 Saudi citizens attacked the United States on 9/11, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has made great strides in fighting extremism inside its own borders. And the changes include revisions to the textbooks that Saudi children use in schoolrooms. However, there is new evidence that the reforms are far less than advertised. The story from NBC News senior investigative correspondent Lisa Myers.
In the classroom and across Saudi society, Saudi officials insist their message has changed dramatically. The land that produced 15
Washington.
We'll take a break here. Up next, do you think you really know your neighbors? Lots of people in this neighborhood thought they did too, until this happened.
I'm Paul
We learned late today the actress June Allyson has died. With her blonde good looks and sunny disposition, she was the girl next door of so many 1940s movies. She starred in 24 pictures as a contract actress back for MGM. In 1945, she married one of her co-stars, the actor-director Dick Powell. Allyson died at her home in Ojai, California. The Bronx, New York native was 88 years old. Here in New York, there was a loud and frightening experience today for people who are used to relatively quiet mornings in a relatively quiet neighborhood of Manhattan. At first, nobody knew what had happened. Then it appeared to be a gas explosion. And tonight, it appears to have been a bizarre attempt at suicide that left 15 people injured, including 10 New York firefighters. NBC's Ron Allen has the story.
It happened without warning just after 8:30 a.m. The huge explosion rocked one of New York's wealthiest neighborhoods.
We heard a loud noise. It was so loud that you could jerk.
A four-story building tucked among designer shops and million-dollar apartments collapsed and ignited into an inferno. Neighbors fled while this man raced home to a nearby building.
I went running through the smoke into the apartment, got the baby and the nanny out of the apartment.
More than 200 firefighters searched for victims while fighting to contain the 6-alarm blaze.
I've seen something like this happen when the World Trade Center got hit.
Fears terrorists had struck were quickly put to rest. Just before the blast, the utility worker had been called to the scene because someone in the neighborhood reported smelling gas. That worker was in the building next door when the explosion happened. He escaped unharmed. Investigators say a gas leak may have caused the explosion. Only one person was in the building, Dr. Nicholas Bartha, who lived and worked there. Rescuers pulled him from the rubble in critical condition and then said his recent phone calls and emails suggested he may have tried to take his own life.
The content of the conversation makes it seem that it is possible it is a suicide.
Court documents show Bartha was involved in a bitter divorce, including a dispute about ownership of the building that burned to the ground. An incident authorities think may have been a personal tragedy that could have caused a much bigger disaster. Ron Allen, NBC News, New York.
Today, you could almost hear television viewers around the globe asking, what was he thinking? This was the scene. Yesterday's World Cup soccer final, Italy versus France. And that is Zidane, French national hero, top soccer player, the Michael Jordan of his craft. The match was in overtime, tied 1-1. The whole world is watching. And then for reasons not apparent to anyone, he does this.
Set something, he comes back and nails him like that. Wow, that's, you know what, that's just...
He headbutted his Italian opponent, and in that instant, he went from legend to louse. It gets worse. That was his last play, his last moment as a player, and his last game before retiring. The spin on this today was that the Italian player was trash-talking somehow about Zidane's mom, but the revenge went to Italy. They pulled ahead in a shootout and won. When we come back here after a break, a question that troubles a whole generation. When is it time to take the keys away?
Expect groundbreaking specials.
Nighttime in Afghanistan.
Expect the people and events that change the world. Everything you expect from America's news leader right in the palm of your hand. NBC News, now on iTunes.
This past weekend, a beautiful summer day was marred by a sudden and terrible accident in New London, Connecticut. An elderly driver, an 89-year-old man, lost control of a car and plowed into the crowd at the annual Sailfest festival there. 27 people were injured, 2 of them seriously. It's one of those stories that's part of a larger issue, how to know that loved ones who are seniors are safe behind the wheel. We get the story tonight from NBC's George Lewis.
Most students take this safety class for older drivers to get an auto insurance discount. Veronica Forbes is the youngest at age 60.
When I repeat to someone my age, it's difficult for me to say those numbers. They sound so foreign to me.
She's a youngster compared to classmate Berna Linden, still highly active at age 81 and still driving.
You bet your sweet Beppy I'm going to drive.
But drivers 70 and older have the second highest incidence of traffic fatalities of all age groups, about 25 deaths per 100,000 population. The only riskier group is teenagers, with more than 30 deaths per 100,000. The American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, representing state officials who administer traffic laws, wants a national standard to measure the driving fitness of seniors.
They should be based upon their functional abilities, their abilities to operate a motor vehicle.
Check your rearview mirrors to see where the blue car is.
Boomers who want a thorough test of their driving abilities can go to places like St. Jude Medical Center in Fullerton, California. Here, the tests included an hour of actual driving in a dual-control car.
Slow down and check.
I've got an arthritic neck that limits my ability to look to the sides and the rear. And instructor Paul Cooper had to slam on the brakes once when I failed to notice an oncoming vehicle.
Whoa, you good catch.
They recommended I get special mirrors to minimize blind spots.
You need to accommodate to the limitations of your neck mobility, but you did pretty well.
And live to tell about it.
Information to help people like me and Veronica Forbes drive safely now that we've passed the big 6-0. George Lewis, NBC News, Fullerton, California.
I'd still drive with George any day. That's our broadcast for this Monday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams. We'll look for you right back here tomorrow evening. Good night.